Welcome back to Trailblazers, the podcast where we spotlight pioneers, disruptors, and changemakers forging bold paths and inspiring the next generation of leaders. Today's guest is a true embodiment of resilience, vision, and purpose, Yusuf Dahl. From navigating the challenges of re-entry after incarceration to becoming a tech developer, Ivy League graduate, and a leading voice in equitable innovation, Yusuf's journey is nothing short of extraordinary. We'll talk about the power of second chances, building through entrepreneurship, and how he's creating opportunities for others to rise. This is a conversation about growth and blazing trails where few have dared to go. This is Trailblazers, and I'm your host, Melody Bradford. Yusuf, thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Yusuf, tell me a little bit about your story. Can you take us back to the beginning and walk us through the early chapters of your journey?
Well, my story is the archetypal poverty to prison story that's been told in many different venues across the country. So I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I have two older brothers, and my mother raised us, and she battled alcohol and chemical dependency issues. And so scarcity and chaos were kind of dominant themes throughout most of my childhood. And kind of with that backdrop, unfortunately, I made a series of poor decisions that just kind of compounded my problems for a long period of time until I was able to pivot and head in a different direction, and one that was much more positive.
Wow. I mean, that's inspiring in and of itself. I mean, okay, so you've overcome significant challenges, including incarceration. What was the turning point that shifted your mindset towards transformation?
Well, I think there was a confluence of factors that allowed me to chart a different path for my life. So if you look at my kind of early experiences and the situations I found myself in as a young man, particularly incarceration, in many respects, that path was preordained for me, if you will. So the community that I come from, over half of the young men by the age of 30 have some level of justice involvement. So my older brother was in prison. My father was in prison. Kind of every significant male figure that I had some level of involvement with the criminal justice system. And so from kind of a very young age, the beliefs that I had and the decisions that I were making in many respects were pushing me in that direction. When I was incarcerated, so when I was 18 years old, I was sentenced to prison for 10 years for the distribution of drugs.
Wow, that's a heavy load. Wow.
Well, it was a hefty sentence, and I, again, this was in the late 90s. This was at the height of America's war on drugs, and harsh punitive sentences were the norm. I don't think at that time a lot of thought was given to rehabilitation as much as it was focused on retribution and, making sure that, folks who committed these crimes paid a stiff sentence as a result of it.
And you must have thought to yourself, wow, my life is over. 10 years is 10 years.
Well, so I was 18 years old at the time, and I was actually lucky to receive 10 years. So I believe I was facing... Well, originally I was facing like 60 years, and then part of my plea bargain, I was facing 30 years. But actually, that's the way these laws are written. You can get 5 years or 50 years. There's
Correct.
Just this huge range of possible outcomes that's left to the discretion of the judge. And so, as I was awaiting my sentence as an 18-year-old who really hadn't experienced much in life. I had never traveled. I had never, done a lot of the things that, are really meaningful in life as you get older. So it was just a young man. And the thought did occur to me that my life could be over before it ever started. And so it was a very serious moment for me. It was a life-changing moment. There's no doubt about it. And so I think between the seriousness of that moment, the severity of this sentence, along with kind of the natural maturation that happens. I mean, it's important for you to understand, I was 18. And so it's interesting for me because I have a 16-year-old daughter. Mm-hmm. And while she's much smarter than I am, while she has the benefit of guidance and safety that I did not have, between us, her decision-making isn't much better than my own was at that time. I mean, she's not out here doing things that could harm people, but when I listen to her talk and I hear her plans, they're just not very realistic, and they reflect the fact that she's 16 and really doesn't have any sense of how this world works.
Right.
And so, I was 18 and I really had no sense of how this world worked. I grew up in an environment where the behaviors I was engaging in were the norms. Mm-hmm. And so, again, going back to that point I made earlier, in that I was on this trajectory. I mean, I was born into a certain set of circumstances where over half of the people who were born into my same exact circumstances had the same outcome that I had. And so while I was incarcerated, my brain fully developed and formed. I mean, we know at 18 years old, you're still growing. Your mind is still developing. Your prefrontal cortex is not done developing. And so I think it was a confluence of all of those factors that led me to reevaluate my life, my beliefs, my assumptions, and the decisions that I was making, and ultimately put me on the trajectory that's leading to this conversation today.
That's incredible. I mean, wow. Talking about, like, when you think about, teens today and, the decision making and whether their circumstance is similar or, they're faced with the same situations, everything seems to be a choice, but it almost took, it sounds like it almost took the trouble that you got into to put you where you are today. And that's pretty compelling as far as, what the next steps are.
Well, it certainly removed me from the environment that I was in.
Yeah.
Right. And once you're removed from an environment, you're able to see it from a different perspective. Mm-hmm. And again, I really cannot underestimate or emphasize enough, I think, just the importance of allowing my brain to fully develop as a human being. I mean, at 18 years old, I was just a kid making very bad decisions and decisions that I needed to be held accountable for. But I think, and I'm sure we're going to get more into this, but, we have a system where you can forever be judged and held accountable for a decision you've made while you were still a child, mm-hmm. right? At 18 years old. And so, yeah, I mean, being removed from my environment, being held accountable, all of these factors contributed to me being able to go down a different path and redefine what my life ultimately would look like. So
then what? So how much time did you serve? Yeah. What happened then when you had that second chance?
Well, I did 5 of the 10 years. And when I was behind bars, I had a chance encounter with a guy who was in prison for a white-collar crime. So he's actually a really interesting gentleman. And he had a master's degree in engineering, but made the very unfortunate decision of defrauding the Kohler Corporation, which is based in Kohler, Wisconsin.
Oh, wow.
So this guy had a longer sentence than I did. He picked the wrong company. And so anyways, he took an interest in me and encouraged me to study computers and software development. And so really, thanks to him, more than anyone, I mean, obviously I put in a lot of work myself to learn these things, but through his encouragement, it put me on a trajectory where I would go on to work for a couple of different Fortune 500 companies. I had fellowships from Google. I've had a fellowship from Tata Consultancy Services where I built software in India for 6 months.
Wow.
So I've had that career pathway is really what opened up all of the other things that I've been able to do in life. And it really all stems back to this chance encounter with this one guy.
And so, okay, so you left and you got these opportunities. Where did Princeton come in? Because, I mean, here comes this Ivy League education. What made you decide to do that? When did you decide to do that? And how did that change things for you?
Yeah, so while I was working as a software developer, I purchased a home in a community that, was fragile, I think would be the right way to describe it. So it was an area that historically had a lot of troubles. In fact, it was a neighborhood that, as a young man, I contributed to a lot of those problems and troubles. But the city had put a lot of money into that neighborhood in hopes of trying to improve the housing stock and living conditions in that neighborhood. And so this is where I purchased a home. And when the foreclosure crisis hit, my neighborhood was ground zero for the, vandalism, the foreclosures, the blight. And
did you own it? Did you
I
own
owned
there?
my home. I owned
at
my
that time.
At that time.
Okay.
And around me, literally, my block imploded. And, I was still employed at the time, and I remember contemplating moving and just, getting a house in a neighborhood that perhaps was a bit more stable and not sustaining the type of damage and destruction that the foreclosure crisis was inflicting upon my community. But ultimately, I decided that I had a responsibility to try to do something about it. And I think that's a theme as we talk about other efforts that I've been involved in that's pretty consistent in my life. I genuinely believe that injustice is never someone else's problem to solve. It's something that, we need to address within our capacities, right, and within the capabilities that we have. And so I ended up buying my neighbor's house really out of no other reason than self-preservation for my own investment and, right, my own safety and well-being. And I bought that house, renovated it, found a family who needed a home, rented it out. The neighbor on the other side went into foreclosure. I bought that property. And then a local NPR station did a story about me. And I was
full circle.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I was able to get some outside capital and ended up leaving my job as a software developer to become a full-time property investor and developer. And it was through that work that I was elected president of Wisconsin's largest apartment association.
Wow.
So I was at the state capitol quite a bit, doing advocacy, working with lawmakers. And through that experience, I got connected with a professor at Princeton who was doing some housing research. And so, again, right, this is a person who took an interest in me, helped open my eyes to something that never considered, didn't understand, like how that could help me increase my capacity to have an impact in the world. And so through his support, I ended up getting a full scholarship so moved my family to New Jersey and did my graduate school at Princeton.
Wow. How inspiring. So a phoenix again, right? You were surrounded by this, foreclosure crisis and chaos again, right? So did you ever just wake up one day and think to yourself, okay, black cloud, go away, or did you ever think, okay, the universe is providing me an opportunity? We talk a lot on this program about, playing the hand that you're dealt and making, lemonade out of lemons. Did you ever get to a point, though, that you just thought to yourself, I'm tired, I need a break. I need some really good stuff to happen here.
Well, I got a 16-year-old daughter. I have that feeling every single day. Are you kidding me? But I truly believe and have always believed that in moments of chaos and uncertainty, opportunity abounds. But it does take a level of conviction and courage to seize it.
Yeah.
And so I tend to be that person where when I see a problem, I'm also simultaneously searching for an opportunity.
That's so inspiring. Now, going through the graduate school at Princeton, what role has education, both formal and informal,
Yep.
played in reshaping your life and your vision?
Yep. For me, education is the most important tool and most important investment that a person can make in themselves. And again, I think I love the way you phrase that, formally and informally.
Mm-hmm.
Because yes, I certainly got a world-class education at Princeton, and I mean the network of people that I met have been incredibly helpful for me along my journey. So it's a place that I have great respect and love for. But the most important education I received, and probably the one that has been most influential in what I've accomplished, is what I learned behind bars, right? Just books, reading on my own, having conversations with different people, learning how to think critically, to question assumptions, and to question the expertise of others, right? We go through life thinking, this person knows, or this person said this is what's happening, so therefore they must be true, or it must be true. And I mean, who the heck are they? They're just a person who looked at a given set of facts and they came to some conclusion, but that doesn't mean you have to just buy into that conclusion.
Or that perception is reality.
Exactly.
Right?
You have to,
Yeah.
to question it and think critically. And those were things that I learned very young, and it was all through informal mechanisms.
That's incredible. Now, so you're in the Lehigh Valley. That was Milwaukee. That was Wisconsin. How did you get here? And you're involved in quite a bit of different programs that you've really helped to develop. And you do quite a bit of work with some of the universities here. Can you walk us through some of that?
Yep, had the great privilege of moving to the Lehigh Valley, almost 9 years ago. So absolutely love the community. It's been great for me, great for my family. And I originally was recruited to build the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Lafayette College. And so I did that for a number of years. In fact, while I was there, we won a national award for the programs that we created to help support and cultivate the next generation of change makers, not only in the Lehigh Valley, but across the country. And as part of my work at the college, I also worked with City Center, and we created the Real Estate Lab in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And that's a program that was designed to provide the knowledge networks and capital to aspiring real estate entrepreneurs from, historically underrepresented backgrounds, and to help them get started in launching their dreams and their aspirations in terms of impacting where they live and how other people live in their communities. And through that program, we've graduated, I think, 5 cohorts now of individuals, and graduates have went on to, at least the last time we calculated this, control over $6 million of real estate in the Lehigh Valley.
Oh.
And these are all folks that, had not been real estate entrepreneurs prior to going into the program. And I most recently I've served as the CEO of the Century Promise, which is a public-private partnership that builds career pathways for Allentown youth and high school graduates to ensure that they're prepared, are exposed to, and have access to opportunities in fast-growing occupations here in the Lehigh Valley.
Wow. So your advocacy work continues, from that perspective as well, as far as creating those career pathways, but also, forging a path for entrepreneurship and what have you.
Well, I mean, the theme of my life, if we were to distill it down, is all about access to opportunity. I'm sitting here across from you today because I had access to opportunity. And so any chance I get the opportunity to extend that to others, right? Whether that's through a program that I'm creating or if it's advocacy that I'm leading, like the work I'm doing around fair housing protections across the country, what gets me up, what motivates me every single day is making sure that people have access to the opportunity that will allow them to not only change their own lives, but change the trajectory for their families.
And you mentioned the fair housing. I wanted to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about that. What are you doing in that space? How are you changing things up for, those that need that?
Yeah, well, remember we talked about earlier that I fundamentally believe that injustice is never someone else's problem to solve.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was maybe about 3 years ago when I left the college. So I was living in college housing. And so when I took on this new opportunity, we had to relocate. And my daughter was starting high school at the time, and she's a pretty good tennis player, a good student. So we were trying to find a school district that was best going to best support her needs and aspirations. And so we decided to rent a townhome, and I was denied access to that apartment unit solely on the basis of my 25-year-old drug selling related conviction.
Oh.
So my income didn't matter, my credit score didn't matter. In fact, no market measures of risk were considered. They solely denied me housing based on a decision I made when I was 18 years old. And so, as I began to understand how this was possible, I learned it was because of a relic of the war on drugs and a little-known amendment that was introduced by then Senator Strom Thurmond from South Carolina that removes fair housing protections as a collateral consequence of any drug selling conviction. So it doesn't matter if it's marijuana, it doesn't matter if it's a gram of cocaine, it just doesn't matter. You lose your fair housing protections. That impacts over 5 million people across the country, and it impacts over 80,000 people in Pennsylvania, creating a situation where those folks who have paid their debt to society cannot live where they want, only where they are allowed.
Wow.
And so understanding that injustice, again, deciding that it wasn't someone else's problem to solve, it was mine, and that's what I've been working on the past 3 years.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So what did you do? Did you finally get an apartment, or did you knock on that door?
Well,
what happened?
This was never an issue about me or my family, because I have been very fortunate enough in life where I was going to be able, and I was able to insulate my daughter from the consequences of that decision. But really what motivated me was that there's millions of families across the country where they don't have many other options if they're denied housing. And so I spent a lot of time, a lot of my own money, and I've advocated both in D.C. and in Pennsylvania. And so in the 118th Congress, Senator Cory Booker and Congressman Maxwell Frost introduced the Fair Future Act. In fact, I'll be going back down to D.C. on the 29th to testify in front of the Reentry and Recovery Caucus about this piece of legislation, and so we hope to reintroduce it in this Congress. And then in the next couple of weeks, we'll be introducing the Fair Future Act in Pennsylvania, which will also remove this artificial barrier to housing and opportunity for folks right here in Pennsylvania.
Wow, that's incredible. So is this going to be your full-time thing that you focus on, or what are you doing now?
Well, I run the Century Promise. That's my full-time job. But, again, where I see an injustice and where I have the ability to extend opportunity for others, that's where you're going to find me. That's where you're going to find me expending my time, my energy, and my effort.
Mm-hmm. That's incredible. What projects beyond that one or initiatives are you working on that you're excited about, but that perhaps maybe some listeners can get involved with?
Well, I would say the big one is the Century Promise. It's a public-private partnership where the fundamental belief that drives our work is that if we can make real the future benefit of education, that it'll change present behavior. I think when you go into some of these high schools, and a lot of youth are engaged in behaviors or not applying themselves to their full potential because oftentimes they don't see the end game or they don't have the guidance at home that would help them refocus their efforts in a more productive and positive way. And so what we do at the Century Promise is, we explicitly build these career pathways and these on-ramps to careers that can really change their lives and the trajectory for their families. And so we have pre-apprenticeships that we've built in the building trades. We have programs that allow folks to transition into meaningful careers in healthcare and other industries. And so this is an effort that really would only be possible in a place like the Lehigh Valley. Mm-hmm. And it's the type of initiative that can really change the future for so many young people in this community. And I would encourage the listeners, where if they wanted to get behind a particular initiative, this is one that is really focused on the next generation of trailblazers and change makers right here in the Lehigh Valley.
Mm-hmm. And so how do we find you? Do you just go to a website? Do you have a brick and mortar?
No, you got hold of me. I'm not hard to find. I mean, they could visit our website, centurypromise.org, and connect with me on LinkedIn, on Insta. I am probably
Do you
the
have a
least
brick and
difficult.
mortar or?
Yeah, but I mean, you're just gonna randomly show up to our office.
Sure.
I may not be there. I'm out in the community quite a bit. But I would say, listen, I'm not hard to find, and I would love to hear from any of your listeners who are interested in any of the work that I'm doing to ensure that folks have access to the opportunity that they need to take responsibility for their lives and direct it in a way that is really going to allow them to achieve their goals and objectives and, oftentimes create opportunities for those that come behind them.
Yeah. And I'll quick share
Please.
Kind of a little bit about my story. I grew up, my parents were divorced at 5. And my mom was a single mom. There wasn't a whole lot of resources to go around. I was her only, thankfully. There wasn't a full house full of kids. I'd like to think I made pretty good decisions, but, I think what really kind of got me jazzed up that actually came full circle, to where I am now doing this. I did an apprenticeship with WFMZ. And that really kind of changed things up for me. And I saw how important it is to have a foundation, to have a base, to have a vision, to say, okay, where am I going in life? And what am I going to do? It does change things. It changes the trajectory. One thing though, because we all have days, right? And maybe not everybody is willing to reach out to Century Promise or whatever. If you came up against a kid that maybe, just found themselves in a situation that they were at a crossroads, and maybe they didn't have that person that was in prison with you, or that was from Princeton. What advice would you give them? What legacy do you want to kind of leave behind that would put you in a position to kind of help them to say, this is what you need to do, kid. This is the path you need to take, and this is why. What advice would you give somebody like that looking for a second chance?
Well, you have to believe in yourself, because if you believe in yourself, then you'll invest in yourself. Mm-hmm. And if you invest in yourself, I promise you others will invest in you as well. And so that's only going to happen. It all starts with you believing that you're greater than your current circumstances, and for you to start investing and working on yourself to put yourself in the position that you want to be in. And I promise you, if you do that long enough and hard enough, you're going to find people out here who are going to see that and that will support you on that journey. And it's not going to be easy, but ultimately, with consistency, with perseverance, and a lot of hard work, I have no doubt that any person can accomplish whatever it is that they want to do.
Well, you're a perfect example of that.
I don't know about that, but
Thanks so much for joining us today, Yusuf. It was really nice to have you here and listen to your story.
thank you for having me.
I'm Melody Bradford, and this is Trailblazers.